remember that day clearly. The bite of winter sharpened the air, though the calendar insisted it was only October. I remember the clang of the community hall doors as I was let in, my mother hissing for me to keep my head up. Dust motes drifted in the pale sunlight as it slanted through high windows, illuminating the white-painted wooden chairs lined up row after row. Everyone was there. Aunt May, with her judgment wrapped in a powder-scented scarf. Uncle Simon. Arms folded. My youngest cousins fidgeting under the fierce gaze of their parents. Old Mr. Hargrove, craggy as the stone gargoyles on the church tower, sat near the front, eyeing me as though I were an item for auction and he'd already decided I wasn't worth the starting bid. It felt like a trial, some cruel game the grown-ups rigged while the children watched wide-eyed on the sidelines. I tried to breathe quietly, hands shoved deep into the pockets of my charity shop coat, but my skin prickled with heat despite the cold. The smell of stale tea and ancient hymn books hung in the room. Up on the slightly raised platform, Reverend Dalton cleared his throat and the chatter hushed. "We're here to talk sensibly," he began, eyes fixed on me, "about decisions and responsibilities. We all care for you, Sophie, and," he paused delicately, "we're worried about these Joyce's dreams. Yes, but there are limits." In the quiet that hung after his words, not a teacher, or a nurse, or a sensible accounting job at Barclays like her cousin. A writer. He let the word hang like a bad smell, looking to each person for some hidden sympathy. Someone tittered. My mother, pinched and pale, stared hard at her hands. My brother stared at the floor. I felt radiator heat buffet the backs of my thighs, sweat and goosebumps at war on my skin. Aunt May turned to the crowd and said, "But what does that mean, really, eh? Sitting about making up stories instead of doing a proper day's work? Who's she expecting to pay the rent? We all have to face facts at some stage. Not all of us can be J.K. Rowling just because we live beside the Thames." General laughter, low and mean. My throat closed. I wanted to shrink smaller and smaller until only my coat remained, empty on the scratched boards. But Reverend Dalton pressed on. "But perhaps, Sophie, you'd like to explain to us what it is you hope to achieve." I could have run. I could have retreated to the shadows, nodded contrition, sworn by the faded mosaic tiles in the vestibule that I'd shelve my books and get a job at Tesco. But something inside me cracked open, resentment, surely, but also a fierce, painful kind of clarity. I met their expectant eyes, and my own voice surprised me. I want to write novels, stories that matter. I want to reach people. I know it sounds stupid to you. I know it's not how things are done. But I have to try. Otherwise, I'll always wonder. Mr. Hargrove barked out a laugh. "Stories won't put supper on the table, love." Heads nodded up and down. A sharp, hot grief knifed through me at their laughter, the utter certainty in their eyes that I would fail. I felt the injustice of it in my bones, how they'd already played out my future, a slow tumble into disappointment, and felt relief watching it unfold from the safety of their well-worn lives. My father placed a stiff hand on my shoulder, squeezing until it hurt. "That's enough, Sophie," he said quietly. "We can talk about this at home." Outside, night crept in, huddling around the orange lamps and the meager warmth of passing cars. I walked home alone, each step burning the shaming deeper into my chest. The next years moved in fits and starts, a blur of temp jobs, borrowed desks, and rejection slips. I lived in a bedsit above a kebab shop off the Holloway Road, where the walls pulsed with the shouts of men and the heavy beats of muffled music. Late at night, with the world reduced to the glowing rectangle of my battered laptop, I wrote. I wrote because I had nothing else. Through frozen mornings and the stink of fried onions drifting through the floorboards, I wrote. Sometimes hunger gnawed so hard I could barely think, but I wrote anyway, because every cutting comment, every rolling laugh murmured, "She'll never make it." Aunt May's sharp little voice, my father's shaking head in the hallway, the way the boys at school smirked when I slipped pages of scrappy short stories into my textbooks. When hope wavered, I pictured standing before them all and showing them something bright, something finished. Years passed. I grew thin and stubborn. My hair lost its innocent curl. Fatigue shadowed my cheeks. I worked at bookshops, cleaned the floors of cafes, answered phones for agencies that cared nothing for names. Each week, I sent out chapters and queries, stacked rejection letters in a shoebox under my bed. When the first novel sold, bought by a small press for the price of a month's rent, I kept quiet, in case it slipped away. Real success wasn't the advance, but the letters from strangers, the first glimmer of reviews. Years melted into more novels, several of which simply faded, but one, unexpected, sharp as a wound, caught fire. People talked. Quiet chatter at first, her name in The Guardian, in a radio interview, sleepless nights with notebooks, borrowed coats. More lived-in lines on my face. What they never saw was the fear that sat inside me, curled like a cat. No matter how many milestones I crossed, their voices still lived inside my head. My parents never read my books. My father stopped mentioning my writing at all. One spring day, 5 novels under my belt, I got a letter, not an email, not a furtive call, but a real envelope, heavy and off-white. It was from Mill Lane Church. Sister Anne wrote that they'd arranged a spring fundraiser, a celebration of local talent to support roof repairs. Would you come, dear Sophie, and perhaps give a reading with sign a few copies? I understand your books are doing quite well. Something in my chest twisted. I thought of those pale walls and high windows, of the laughter that scalded, of the child I'd been, small, stubborn, foolish in my belief that stories could open doors. Still, I wrote back, "Yes, I'll come." The air buzzed with the usual village spring push and pull, tables loaded with cakes, elderly women in pastel cardigans hoarding seats. The girls, my old school tormentors, now mothers and teachers, awkward and snug as they set up a face painting stall. Posters with my photograph hum on the doors, strangers blinked recognition. I came alone, carrying nothing but a canvas bag and nerves. My books, stacked on a table by the tea urn, looked alien beside those homespun cakes. My heart thudded in my chest as I signed them to strangers and old classmates alike. Each time I saw a raised eyebrow or heard a hissed, "That's her, the novelist," I felt the old prickle of shame. But something else, too, something lighter. The church itself had not changed. Same flickering bulbs, same green velvet pew cushions, fraying at the edges. I glanced up at the platform, where Reverend Dalton smoothed his hair and pancaked smile before the crowd. He took the microphone, offered the usual welcome, rain in the forecast, fundraising so crucial. Wasn't it lovely how so many had come out, and wasn't it something to have our very own Sophie Bailey, celebrated novelist, home again? Applause, uncertain at first. I walked up the steps. The room pulsed with ancient memories, but now the faces were older, rounder, the lines deeper. I saw my mother by the aisle, her lipstick unfamiliar, clutching her handbag. I caught Aunt May's frown across the room, and my heart clenched, but I spoke anyway. "Thank you for inviting me," I began, my voice shaking only a little. "I grew up in these pews. I can't count how many times I sat staring at those windows, wondering what my future would look like. Some of you might remember." Here I paused, looking at Mr. Hargrove, at Aunt May, at the identical lines of disappointment. How little faith there was once in my ability to, well, make stories matter. An uneasy laugh. I swallowed, looked down at the paper in my hand. So, I suppose it's only fair to show you what came of all